Hey there, aspiring horror authors. It's another episode of Sako and the Moon, created by two self-published horror authors. Did you know that you can write jump scares into your stories? Listen on and let's explore exactly how. I am Sako Toomey, artist and author and a bunch of other things, but we'll just mention that I'm self-published 3 times over. I've been working on my craft for decades, and now I'd like to share my skills with you guys. Oh, hold up.
She
Try that
muted
again.
me during my intro. Can you believe that? Actually, if you
Not
watch the show,
during.
if you see how much I talk on the show, then you'd understand exactly why she muted me for my own introduction. But I'm this guy, and she hates when I say that, so I was going to say it again because she muted me the first time. No, I'm Dewan L. Hearn, more affectionately known as the Moon, and once published. I guess you can technically say I received an award for something that I wrote in screenwriting. So I do the things, and that's why I'm always called the doer of things.
The doer of things.
We need that. We need to like rework our merch. We need like doer of things shirts. We need the Omni hat. We need the however comma shirt. We need all of that. We need to work on that.
Okay. Well, I'll work on that.
That look on her face means we're not doing
No, I'll work on it. It'll be fine. Everything will be fine. Writing effective jump scares, especially in prose, requires careful timing, pacing, and the ability to play with the reader's expectations. While jump scares are often associated with visual media, they can be just as impactful in writing with the right approach.
That is absolutely true. I can think of one book that I'll probably reference a lot in this episode because to me, I mean, we're going to probably get into setup, explaining what jump scares are, how they go from like visual to premium. We'll discuss all that in the course of the episode. But there's one book that to me, which is a really, really effective book, and it did all the things that we're probably going to talk about. So there's a book that I'll probably reference here.
Okay. I have 6 points, basically, each with 2 little bullet points under them, and we can rip this apart. So, build tension gradually. Setting the scene. Describe a scene that gradually increases in tension. Use sensory details to immerse the reader and hint at something unsettling in the background. The reader should feel like something is off, even if they can't pinpoint what it is.
You got your bullet points? I'll jump in after that.
That was bullet point number 1.
Oh. Okay. So when you see a jump scare in film, that's a great place to start because everyone's familiar with. When you see a jump scare in film, it's kind of like the setup is a lot like in pick a Scream movie where the person opens the closet door fills the frame, and there's like that tension with the music. The door closes, there's nothing there. What that part of the scene does is it sets up the expectation of, oh, things could be hiding behind something like this, or something could be in this weird space. Or when they pan to show a closet in the room, you're like, ooh, I bet he's in there. I bet he's in there. You set up the familiar scene. In writing, when you write prose, it's the same thing essentially. You take advantage of the familiarity of the environment with the reader. If the reader has been to the gym, right, then the reader can fill in the blanks of the gym, right? My gym will look different than your gym or whatever, but essentially the gym will be the same. You'll have an idea, you describe the building, describe the room, mention the equipment, you're setting it up, and we fill in the blanks with what we're familiar with. That's an interesting trick to always use in prose because you don't have to say everything. And sometimes your jump scare or your surprises come out of a expectation that they've created for themselves, which means it's most effective.
Well put. All right. Bullet point number 2. Pacing. Slow down the narrative as you build toward the scare. Use longer sentences and detailed descriptions to create a sense of unease. Then suddenly break this rhythm with something unexpected.
So the jump scare comes out at a point of high tension. So that's what creates the jump scare. The jump part is it's a surprise. The scare is because the person already has that heightened anxiety. So when you break that down, you just realize that that's what you have to do. Once the environment is notified and you're aware of what the environment is, now you have to start adding this subtle little differences. You're at the gym, so you're okay. So the book I wanted to reference is Afraid by Jack Ketchum. Great book. Um, Basically, if you ever need a trigger warning, it all applies to this book. But it's such a wonderfully done book. And there's a scene that takes place in a gymnasium, right? You know what a high school gymnasium looks like. It's basically a big space with a basketball court and some bleachers, and there's doors that lead here and doors that lead to a locker room. That's a gymnasium. I don't have to otherwise describe that to you, but I will. I will take the time to spell all that out because now I'm drawing you in with my words. She said, longer sentences, draw out the descriptions. So I'm going to describe this room that you're already familiar with. You're going to fill in the blanks in your own mind with, I know what my high school gym looked like. I've been in one. I went to a basketball game before. It's cool. Then somebody goes out for a smoke and notices that there's chains on the door. That's a little bit out of the normal. Nothing happens in that part of the scene, right? It's just an observation. Someone's standing by a door that's otherwise been locked. And it's like, wow, why is this door locked? Now you've added something abnormal. Now you're like the person's questioning it. As the character is questioning it, they're starting to wonder. That wonder can easily turn into anxiety. That's what you want. Then when the shock comes, they're heightened, you're heightened, jump scare. You're still muted.
2. Subvert expectations. False sense of security. Lead the reader to believe that nothing is going to happen or that the character is safe. This can be achieved by focusing on something mundane or by resolving a previous tension without incident.
That is like jump scare 101. It really is. And I know we're talking about how different it is in writing versus film, but I think film is one of the places that it happens the most often, obviously. And it's a great reference point because as a writer, we have to take from the environment of what we're aware of, what we know, write what you know. And if you watch jump scares and how they're set up, when you're doing a script for a film, you're still writing it down. This has not happened on camera yet. So if you're a screenwriter, You know, maybe you're not writing a horror novel, but if you're writing a screenplay, like you still have to write these moments in. This is all still how you're describing the scene. Obviously, there's going to be some more space for the director, and that's a whole different conversation. But you still have to understand what's happening in the scene if you're going to be the one writing the scene. So I use that reference for that. But, you know, like we said before, you set up what you know, the school gymnasium for the example that I used, and then something different, something off, something that you weren't expecting. And that's like that chained locked door. And then things have to go in a direction that they shouldn't go. Something's got to be off. You know, you expect it to go one way, boom. Now you're over here for some reason. No one understands why. That's how the jump scare happens.
On a similar note, the unexpected shift. The jump scare should occur when the reader least expects it. Oy. I can speak. Really, I can.
She really can.
Drop it suddenly and without warning, often after a moment of calm or normalcy.
When in my mind, I'm thinking about Scream 5. There's that scene with Wes when he's at the house and he comes out of the shower. We've already talked to his mom. We know the killer is there. The killer has said, I'm there. So we know he's there. We know it. Wes is completely unaware. He goes to open a cabinet door. We're like, oh, he's going to pop out there. Closes it. Nothing. He goes to open the refrigerator door. Opens it. Fills the scene. Closes it. Nothing. Everything is fine. We've created these high tension moments with the doors. And then he stops and it's like, oh, well, the door's unlocked. Well, I'm gonna go lock that door quick. And then boom, out of nowhere, boom, that's where the killer comes out. And because we created the tension, nothing happened. So we're like, oh, okay. The guard comes down for just a moment, and that's when it happens. And that's a great example of it in film. When in the book that I was referring to, Afraid, there's a scene where they're in the back of a diner. The lights are out, so it's pitch black. She's holding someone's hand, and then she feels something else nearby that shouldn't have been in the room, because it should have just been those two. And because this is before they really realize what's happening. And so when you feel that something else, you're like, oh shit. And it's those moments right there that we're trying to create. But you have to establish the expectations. You have to set everything up a certain way. And then in that low point, get them. Otherwise, it's pointless.
3.
Not
Use
pointless.
use sensory shock. So sudden, vivid imagery. When the scare happens, use sharp, vivid descriptions to create a strong mental image. Words like crash, scream, or bang can be effective in jolting the reader.
Oh, my camera just readjusted.
It did.
It did. I don't know why. I'm clearly over here. So, but yeah, like language is really, really important. That's what I'm taking out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Language is super important. Simple words like said, asked, those are the kind of things I always throw. Be more descriptive. Use adverbs. Not a whole lot.
They're not the worst thing that ever
They're
happened.
not. And I'm going to take about 20 seconds on this. Adverbs are not bad. Any word product like this, anything that ends with "ly," they start wanting to tell you to draw out. Now you can start using words too much. I had a problem with the word "really" because I say it a lot, so I used "really" a lot. Don't do that. That takes people out of your writings. Don't do it. But adverbs are not bad. They take what you've got and they bring forth a new emphasis to it. And in a moment like this, because I'm going back to the subject now, in a moment like this, the language that you use is so important. Use harsh words, words that will create the emotional impact that you want the reader to have. Words are powerful. There's a lot of words that mean something similar. They don't mean the same. If they were the same, they wouldn't be two separate words. There is some nuanced difference between certain sets of words. Don't discount your readers. Do not assume that your readers are stupid. Embrace your readers' intelligence. Utilize it. And hell, if you have to use a word that they don't know, that's on them. They'll stop. They'll look it up because you already got them caught up in the scene. If they go back and look it up, okay, cool, then they'll come back to the scene. They'll reread it in context, and now you've got them. And you taught them a new word. Language is important.
And we'll get more into language and sentence structure and all of that here in a minute. But first, I want to talk about surprise in action. The scare should be immediate and jarring. If a character hears a loud noise, feels a cold touch, or sees something horrific, describe it in a way that pulls the reader into the moment.
I mean, that kind of ties into what I just said.
It does.
It's actually that goes into language, and it's something as simple as if you have a really detailed conversation between two people, say Sako and me, and then all of a sudden there was, or let's say that we're writing about this scene, we're doing this podcast, something happens in the background of Sako's screen, and so she mutes herself. So Sako mutes herself, she walks on. I'm giving more detail and description, and I'm just babbling on, and all of a sudden I pause, and although I see that she's still muted, another voice comes through the screen, or comes through the show.
Dun, dun, dun.
It's something just as subtle as that. It's got to be it can be subtle, but it's those kinds of moments that you draw, because it's just that ties in everything we've talked about so far. I mean, that subverts expectation because I expect to be the only voice. That, and how you would describe that is, I don't know, maybe if I have my headphones on and I hear a whisper in my ear, something, when she's supposed to otherwise be muted, and the only other voice I should be hearing is hers. And you can describe that if I'm supposed to be scared, if I'm in the room alone, or if I'm in a new environment, or we're on location somewhere, we're on location in a haunted house, then that would be a great expectation, a great time to throw in a ghost voice on my head, something like that. And it could just be like a whistling sound in my ear all of a sudden. And then I take off my headphones, and then there's suddenly a crash behind me. Boom.
Jump scare.
Subvert expectation, sudden occurrence.
Mm-hmm. And the way that we actually start making those jump scares jumpy is with short, punchy sentences. So contrast with the buildup. After long descriptive paragraphs, hit the reader with short, punchy sentences to convey the suddenness of the scare. This change in rhythm can be disorienting and effective.
Very much so. And this is actually really good for writers in any genre doing literally anything. If I'm going to have a sentence that runs on no matter what I'm saying, and I have a bunch of ands, or use a semicolon to continue a thought a little bit further than maybe I originally intended, maybe different than what Sako would have intended, then I stop. Then I'm here. I take my hat off. I sit down. You see how mentally you were listening to me, and as I'm just kind of droning on and blah, 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 you're following along in that same kind of drone. Then I stop. Then I lean in. Then I put my hands up. And now the sentences are shorter. You're like, follow along, stop. Follow along, stop. Follow along, stop. Follow along, stop. Imagine walking down a long hallway versus walking down a room, turning left, walking down a hall, turning right, walking down a room, turning left. That would be a lot less comforting under any environment. If you're in a scary, tense environment, the fact of having to do that would create tension because you don't know what's around any other corner. And it's not so much like that's the setup. This is more so a reflection of sentence structure, as Sako was talking about. If you create those long, drawn-on sentences, you're drawing the person in. Once they start getting snappy, it's start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. You can reflect that in just having a sentence by itself, almost like in a line, in a line, in a line, in a line, in a line. And I don't care what your editor says. That's okay. You can have a sentence here. Send your editor to me. That's fine. I'll fight them. To go here, short sentence, short sentence, short sentence, short sentence, short sentence. Get through the page. And when you're formatting, make sure they're together. Because if your formatting breaks page, it's gonna be a little bit less effective. So make sure that you get all those punchy little lines, they're on a page together. I know that's a little bit deeper than what we're trying to get into, but that's the presentation of your words, the presentation of your scene. So you want it to be effective. You don't want something like formatting to throw it off.
In a similar vein, fragmented thoughts. Sometimes breaking up sentences into fragments can mimic the frantic, panicked thoughts of the character, making the scare more intense.
When you're scared, you don't have a logical frame of mind. You are absorbing every, like, just natural body reaction. You're absorbing every sound, every sight. You're taking in smells depending on your environment. And of course, the sense, do not ignore touch. And remember, we touch with more than just our hands. Our nerves are everywhere. The nerves are on our arms. The nerves are on our neck. There's nerves on our face. And if I'm in a dark room, if my hands are out trying to touch things, now I'm drawing the reader's attention to my hands. If something was to crawl across my face while I'm touching things in the dark, oh, that'll throw me off. And that would throw the reader off too, which is what you want. That's the goal. You're trying to throw them off their game, throw your character off. All these things are coming into your character at one time. Your brain is not going to process that into long, complete sentences. Use that, show that, reflect it. It might help to do that in another example earlier in your piece so that you can get the reader kind of accustomed to, one, how you're writing that, and two, how the character thinks. And then once you've shown the character thinks fragmentedly, see, there's an adverb, fragmentedly.
Fragmented.
It may not be a word, but it's an adverb. But that now that you set the tone for what your character does, when your reader is reading it later in that intense moment, they are less thrown off by your structure. So that doesn't throw them off. So you keep them engaged, because you have to keep them engaged. If you're going to do something fragmented, you don't want that part of it to throw the reader off. Not every reader is used to that. So you want to make sure that you set it up, bring it in, and utilize it somewhere in that moment. But be scatterbrained, kind of like that thought process was, which was intentional.
Which was intentional.
I do know some things, I promise, I swear.
Number 5, end the scene abruptly. Leave some ambiguity. After the scare, consider ending the scene abruptly, leaving some elements unresolved. This can keep the reader on edge and maintain a lingering sense of fear.
I did a master class with Dan Brown, the author of the Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons. I love that author. And part of his master class tells you to, like, don't end your chapters at the end of something happening. Break your chapters up in the middle of something happening. At the time I was reading a project I was working on a project that I've not yet released, so I'm keeping myself. But I have broken down how I wanted my chapters, and in my head, it starts when something starts and it ended when something ended. And then the moment that I heard Dan Brown say that, I went back to my outline. I looked at my chapters. I just took a red line and I cut it off somewhere in the middle of it. And then when I went back and looked over it, because I'm in the middle of the situation, the person, I've built up the tension, I've built up the situation, and then boom, I just cut it off. I'm like, wait. And I remember reading it in other books. And then that part, now I recognize what it was. It was the chapter break in the middle of something happening. Your reader is now invested. So make sure you've gotten to the point where the reader is invested. Then, like right after the touch, the sudden out of nowhere touch in the dark, cut it off. And you should be having more than one storyline going on, more than one thing happening. Switch. Go to something else. So if these people are over here on the west side of town, go to the south side of town. See what that group of people are doing. This leaves the person like, wait, what's happening? And they have to get through that chapter where you do it all over again. And it just keeps the reader like, oh my God, what is happening? The amount of times I've had a friend reading a book of theirs, and they're like, no, I had to stop reading this chapter when I got to work, and I've been thinking about it for hours. I can't wait for my next break so I can just see what happens next. That's what you're trying to create. And that is how you do it. Find something that's happening, break it off in the middle, go on to something else. And when you go on to something else, start at that top of that lull, make it calm. Like that throws the reader off emotionally. You want that. You want that emotional chaos because you're writing horror. Remember, that's what we do here. And you want emotional chaos. The beautiful thing about horror is why I love it, is because it involves all of the emotions. You need all of the emotions to tell our stories. Romance, a lot of love and sadness. Love and sadness. And some other things from what I've heard from my friends that read romance. We won't get into that on this show. We'll get kicked off of YouTube. But that's the thing about horror. We have so much emotion. We need all of it to tell our stories. So use all of it to tell your stories. Create the high point, cut it off, and then go to something simple like Sally and Joe having dinner. I don't know who Sally and Joe are, but they're hungry.
So now that we're talking about characters,
Sally and Joe.
Character reactions. Genuine fear. Show the character's immediate reaction to the scare, whether it's a scream, a physical jolt, or a panic scramble. The reader's empathy with the character can amplify the intensity of the jump scare.
It's something as simple as something touches, they're in a dark room, the girl's got a flashlight, she's looking forward because she's walking forward. Something touches her back, she screams, she throws the flashlight, and now she's lost in the dark, scrambling because now she doesn't know what's happening. Your character has to be scared. You shouldn't have to say that.
You shouldn't have to say that. Yeah.
Your character has to be scared. And I personally enjoy when the character's sudden reaction makes their situation worse. And it puts them in more assumed danger. Keyword there's the assumed danger, maybe perceived danger. Because we already know they're in danger. They're in a horror novel. We know they're in danger. But they have to feel like the danger is immediate, right there. If they throw their flashlight and now they can't see what's ahead of them, they can't see the killer's ahead of them. They felt them behind them, but if they turn around and feel behind them and there's no one there, now they've lost the killer in a dark space. Right? So it's just moments like this where like the it boils down to the character is scared. I laugh because you have to say it, but you shouldn't feel like you have to say it. but it's one of those things that you don't necessarily need your character. Okay, here, I'll take a moment. I get your character maybe the final girl, right? Maybe Sally's your final girl.
Okay.
But she doesn't have to be a badass the whole time.
She has to grow into her badassery.
Right. You're Next is an interesting example because Erin, who's essentially our final girl, is kind of a badass from jump.
Yeah.
But she's in a vulnerable situation because she's just now meeting the family. So if you've never seen You're Next, a girl's dating a guy, there's like a anniversary dinner with the family, his family. So there's the first time they're meeting her. So she's in an environment she doesn't know. She's around people she hasn't met, and something crazy is happening, and everyone's being murdered. It's a horror. It's a horror movie.
It's one of my favorites.
It's really really good. If you've ever watched You're Next and you didn't like it, I ask you to just take a moment, stop, go back and watch it more objectively, and you'll see exactly how great that movie is. I had to do the same thing with It Follows, but that's not what we're talking about here.
No, I had to do the same thing with It Follows. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like It Follows at first, but again, not a movie review show. Erin is kind of a badass from Jump Street, but there has to be a moment of vulnerability. Now, if you give Erin a counterpart, that's the counterpart that's going to have the vulnerability and be scared and whatnot. You can see it through there. But that is the only odd side of Erin in that particular movie, that she does seem to be this badass from the beginning, right? And she's able to kind of thwart all the goings on and the shenanigans throughout the movie almost without hesitation, without fail. She's pretty fucking badass. But that's a rare exception, hence why I mentioned it. But you have all these other people who are in vulnerable situations, and you gotta watch the movie and get in more detail how it all plays out and works together. But that is a jarring exception to this rule, and you can't lean on these types of exceptions. Your character has to be vulnerable. I referred to Scream earlier. Especially in the earlier movies, Sidney Prescott is tough, but she's also very scared. And she's, fearful of her boyfriend, so she's emotionally vulnerable. So there's these moments where her guard's down because she feels like she should be. She's with her friends, she's with her boyfriend, she's here, she's there. And in those vulnerabilities is when these kind of things happen, So your character has to be scared. Unlike maybe Erin, the character needs to be scared, make them act scared, make them react scared, show their fear, and preferably make their situation slightly worse because of it.
Sometimes a scare can be more effective if the character doesn't immediately realize what's happening and the reader pieces it together before they do. This can create a sense of dread as the character catches up.
I mean, that's pretty straightforward. How many times have you gone by and seen the killer crawl, like running in the background? You're like, ah, he's already there. And now you're just waiting for the character to figure it out. There's if you haven't figured out Scream's my favorite franchise, there's the part in Scream 2 where they're at the sorority house. Cece is answering the phone. She's having that back and forth with who she thinks is Ted. And as they're talking here in the foreground, you see Ghostface come through the door in the background. And then the roommate locks the door, like closes the door, leaves, and sets the alarm. So the alarm is set to the house. We already know the killer's inside. She doesn't. And so now we're just waiting for Cece to figure it out, for her to encounter Ghostface. And it's those moments that you need to kind of recreate. As you're setting up the scene that's familiar, and you're adding the elements that are different, they're slightly off, to create that, ooh, what's that? Why is that happening? you can set something up where uh, the the strangers and the fire alarm, the smoke detector, or the phone in the fire that we see. Someone had to do that. We know what's happening. Or when Liv Tyler's sitting there and the killer just pops up in the background, just standing there, she's clueless. Set it up to where we know what's about to happen. We know the killer's there. We know the danger is pending. We hear the hiss of the gas. We're like, oh, that's gas coming. They're in the kitchen. That hissing sound, that's the gas. That weird smell they're unfamiliar with, oh yeah, something's about to. As soon as like, well, I gotta find a candle. Now you've said candle. We've introduced the elements of gas. You know something about to blow up. Now they just gotta figure it out. Set up stuff.
Yep. Just set them up and knock them down.
Set them up and knock them down.
Okay, so I've got a little thing that I wrote that I would like to share that kind of takes all of those things and puts them together. Imagine a character walking through a dark abandoned house, right? Okay. He reached out to steady himself against the wall, the wood cool and rough under his fingertips. Each step echoed in the silence, the only sound in the vast emptiness. His breath quickened, but he kept moving, convinced he was alone. A floorboard creaked behind him. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly he turned, eyes scanning the shadows. Nothing, just darkness. He exhaled, shaking his head. Must be the house settling. Suddenly a hand clamped onto his shoulder, cold and firm. He screamed, whipping around, but there was no one there. So in this example, the tension builds with the characters increasing unease, is momentarily diffused, and then sharply rises with the sudden unexpected scare.
To utilize that with an example for something else, Sherman. Who has not moved into a house and heard weird noises that they weren't familiar with? I don't know a single person. Every time I've stayed in a house, a hotel room in a new place or new part of town, or I've moved in my first night in the place, there's always some sound I'm unfamiliar with. The unfamiliarity of that sound creates my tension, but it could just be the house. Maybe this is just what it sounds like here, and I'm just hyper aware of it, so that the tensions, lull out. And just like having that hand just gripping you from behind and then not being there, that is a worse feeling than having turned around and found somebody. If you turned around and found somebody, you know what your threat is now. It's a person behind you. Now you can engage with the threat. If there isn't a threat there, now you've got a lot of questions to ask yourself. Did I feel that? If I did feel it, what was it? Where did it go? If I didn't feel it, what's wrong with me? Am I sick? Am I crazy? Am I delusional? And when the character continues to doubt themselves in that moment, they become unsure of every bit of sensory reception that they get. They question everything. They question the positives, they question the negatives. They question every threat that is blatantly in front of them. You can then create a character that sees the killer in front of them, sees the ghost coming, but questions it, despite it being right there in front of them. And it's those little things, because you expected the hand on the shoulder, someone to be there. The character expected someone to be there. Expectations were subverted when there was nothing present. Now you don't know how to engage the threat because you don't know what the threat is. You don't even know if there really is a threat. Having your character unsure, scared, is kind of the thing here. Because not only are we trying to scare the reader, we're trying to scare the characters. Probably them more than you, but you are going to embody the location. You're manifesting through that character. You're living vicariously through them. So when we scare them, we scare you. That's the goal. That's your goal as a horror writer. Do that. Well done, sir. Well done.
Thank you. Those were all my notes. So we can talk about the relation between writing a jump scare and then or viewing a jump scare on screen.
Well, ultimately, there's not a lot difference, except for the utilization of sensory, right?
Mm.
In a film, when you're creating a film and you're watching a movie, I can hear the music creating tension. I can see a threat that the character may not be able to see. I can, I can do all those things utilizing other senses. When I'm reading, all I can do is read the words. Everything else has to come up, like be created in my mind. I can't show. In a movie, I can show you what a crazy looking weird door looks like, or what an old rickety staircase looks like. When you're writing, you have to describe that. You have to talk about lighting coming through a window and the side of rotten wood, or how rotten wood feels. In a movie, I can see him touch a railing and how he reacts to it. Like, oh, it hurt. Okay, so that might be sharp. Or that poked me. Oh, that's sharp. The character might just flat out say it. I can have that happen and show that without words if I wanted to in a film. When you're writing things out in prose, that is what you want to convey in writing. You want to see what you see and then write that down. So show how he is apprehensive for climbing those old rickety stairs, how he steps on a board and it breaks under his foot suddenly and he has to yank his foot back, or give him a moment of panic when his foot goes through the stair and he thinks he might fall through, and then something pushes his foot back up from underneath. And then in the moment, he's like, oh, wait, what was that? Could be anything. Create false jump scares with something like a mouse running through that old rickety house, or something falls down, like he's climbing up the stairs, can't see the top of the stairs. A ball bounces down the stairs next to him, and then a mouse runs down the stairs. So like, oh, maybe the owners just had the ball there and the mouse knocked it over. That's very logical. That's very sensible. And then when you hear a sound upstairs, well, now you know that's. Am I frozen? Anyway, now you know that's what the.
You're frozen currently.
I thought I was. Can you hear me still though?
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's a weird face, but that's fine. Thank you. But yeah, then there's a moment there where they are scared of the thing that's happened. So just make sure that you are writing down what you would otherwise see. The scene can be the same, right? But that's essentially what you're working on. Do that. I mean, I guess that's basically it. You know, what you would otherwise see, write it down. And make sure that you are taking everything into consideration. Those small little nuanced reactions that the character would otherwise be visually experiencing, write that down. Make sure you're explaining what they see, what they hear, how they're reacting. If that makes them scared, if that draws tension, if they're reacting to it, show that. Emphasize that. Take a scene that would last 15 seconds on screen and make it and draw it out to 3 pages. I know that's a weird piece of advice, but you want to be able to focus on all of those notions, not to the point where you're boring. That kind of goes without saying, but a lot happens in 10 or 15 seconds visually, but there's a lot of information on that screen in that 10 to 15 seconds. It's one thing we don't think about too much. Like, take your next horror movie and have and randomly pause, right? Randomly pause and look at what's in front of you. If it's just the character's face, keep going. But if it's the scene in the room, think about what was in that room. And it took you like maybe 2 seconds to sweep the space. But how long would that take you to describe if you had to describe that to someone who couldn't see it? That'd be a very interesting practice for you, dear reader or dear watcher of the show. Just take a horror movie, and when you see a scene, pause. And then, in as much detail as you can, without boring yourself to death, write down what you're seeing in this screen. What about the window? What time of day is it? Is there light coming through? Because light coming through during the day is different than light coming through at night. Light coming through at night is the source, and it's not just the moon. So emphasize that, because if it's a street light that's providing all the light in that room, something can very easily happen to that street light, darkness. That's something for you to utilize later. So write it down what you see in that little scene there, and it's really jarring that I'm not moving.
It very much so is, and I think you have to leave and come back.
I might
repair it.
I don't even know if I want to. We're at the end of the show at this point. But yeah, like, try that as an exercise, and just practice doing that and being aware of what you're seeing and what that looks like on paper. There's anything else for Ice Moon? Because I'm frozen.
Because you're frozen.
I'm Ice Moon.
Yeah, I can't.
I mean, like I said, as long as they can hear me, it's fine.
And yeah, they can.
We're at like 48 minutes, so we're going to close here shortly. So there's really not a whole lot. There's no reason. That's why I'm not putting a lot of effort into trying to fix it, because we're about to. It's jarring, but we're about to wrap it up.
So, by using these techniques, you can create jump scares that are just as effective on the page as they are on screen. That is the moral of this story, yeah?
See?
If you like this video at any point, I encourage you to hit the like button. And if you want to see more episodes like this one, you might want to subscribe and maybe even ring that bell on the off chance that YouTube actually notifies you when we go live. And we will catch you on the flip side.